when we were setting up a time to talk today, one of the things that you had mentioned is that you're not actually the data center. It sounds like you're more like the landlord or the property owner of the land and the building. Is that how I understood that?
Yeah, I would characterize it more as like the developer. But yeah, that would obviously also overlap with landlord or landowner, but the developer of the project, especially in this case and early on in the process.
Okay. And can you tell me a little bit about what this process is going to be like then? You're acquiring the land, getting the permits, that kind of thing, building the facility, and then finding a data center company to move in. Am I right with that?
Yeah, I mean that's a kind of a good high level starting point of yeah. So we acquired the land. Maybe you are familiar or not, but towards the end of 2024. And there's a lot of pieces that need to go into place in order to eventually get to a potential data center end user. Uh, some of that has to do, for example, with the power, making sure and kind of coordinating the logistics of how we can deliver power there. A lot of the other parts are the zoning. As you know, we've gone through what that's, an entitlement process with the city in order to annex in, also the utilities that would be water and sewer that we'd potentially get from the city, among other things too, whether it's you'd want, fire, police, other city resources, um, as part of being part of a city that comes with it as well. And those are important aspects of any project, whether it's, a commercial office building or anything else for that matter. So we've been going through that process and trying to prepare the site, yes, to eventually try and attract a end user. We are more of a real estate company developer that would be that's doing this part, the entitlement and power process with Excel, as well as preparing the property for construction and so forth. But ultimately, there would be an end user that's more of a data center operator that would come in. And so that's kind of we're not even at that stage yet. But getting the zoning done as the other night is just one hurdle that we need to clear in order to get there.
And one of the things that you had mentioned in the meeting, and I understand you had the same time limits as everyone else, according to our conversation earlier today, is that you were thinking that perhaps some of the concerns that were brought forward were based on existing data centers that may not be the same as today. So, can you help us understand what the differences are today that could be reassuring for others?
Yeah, I really appreciate this opportunity to try and provide some more context about that because I didn't get too much time to dive into it. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of examples shared about, I think one example or topic is water usage. And a lot of data centers were previously designed using evaporative cooling. And let's say if those were built 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was kind of built under a scenario where water wasn't much of a concern. So they just built without that being something of too much consideration. But the technology, especially with cooling, has gone in a much different direction, and is now treating water efficiency as a big priority. So just to kind of provide some more data. And I know we spoke earlier, and I wanted to kind of get in touch with some of our consultants to get some more information to kind of provide to you. Um, but maybe a few examples I could give is one, for example, previous evaporative cooling. They did some analysis, the mechanical engineers and so forth, for 100 MW, just to use that as like an example under that evaporative cooling, that would use somewhere around, and I have the number here because I know I wouldn't remember it off the top of my head. Um, Depending on the type, if it was direct evaporative cooling, could be about 10 million gallons of water a year. And then if it was water cooled chillers, something even greater, like 548 million gallons of water. So that's like how they used to be designed. Now, the ones that we're looking at with these closed loop systems that came up a lot, direct cooling and so forth, I can get into that more too. We're looking at 1 million gallons of water per year, which from our research, it's about equivalent to 10 households. That's what 100 megawatts. So in our case, we are planning, if everything were to fall into place, 500 megawatts, that would be about 50 households, which I think is a lot different than what maybe people are thinking. Compare that 100 megawatts, just a few other points is like half of a car wash. That a car wash uses twice as much as 100 megawatts. So it's definitely that's where I was just trying to make my point is those older systems were not really using water efficiently. And also, I think there's an advantage in South Dakota too because of the climate. We're not building this in Phoenix, Arizona, where shockingly, I don't know why there's actually a lot of data centers there, but you're fighting the heat quite a bit. The colder climate actually even makes it more advantageous to use those natural climate to help with the cooling as well. So that's just one aspect. I don't know how much I could spend a few more minutes on that, but I don't want to take up the whole time. If you want, I can share a few more important facts.
Sure. I was wondering too about electricity. That seems to be water and electricity. Those are both
Right.
coming up together. What do you have to say about that?
So about electricity, um, a very big point I did briefly mention in the meeting, but just to reemphasize, any of the upgrades uh, are a cost to us, the developer. So this wouldn't fall to like, for example, Excel's not going to be covering the costs of upgrades and then passing that along to other, consumers. Um, in South Dakota or anywhere else. We are actually going to have to foot the bill for all of that. So I think that's one important point. I think that, I've spoken to the people at Excel. They've been a great, partner in this process. And I brought up these concerns with them too to get their exact feedback. So really the biggest concern the public should have with respect to power and how a data center could affect things is if Excel were to take on significant increases in costs, and all of a sudden the data center didn't decide to use the power. And now, okay, who's going to foot the bill for all these costs? So there are several safety guards that actually are put into any power agreement that would be signed at a later date. We haven't signed anything like that, but there are minimum requirements. So if we sign up to use 500 megawatts, for example, we're going to be on the hook for that. And whether we use it or don't use it, we're going to have to pay because it has to offset the costs. Another part is just financial security, as well as, again, that end user would probably be actually the entity that would be signing this agreement. So they would have to have just the financial stability that, hey, they can't just stop paying their bill. They have guarantees in place and they're financially viable. And also, even if they try to, shut down, let's say the operation, there's, exit fees involved. So this would all be built into the contract. And all that would actually, from what they've told me, is at the time when something like that is ready, it would actually be, it would go in front of the PUC. The agreement would be open for everyone to look at. The rates would be there. Everything would be published, open book. And so that's, I think, the biggest concerns and how those are mitigated, controlled, to make sure that it doesn't fall back on the public.
And from what I'm seeing, it maybe that was a different case, like in West Virginia, where the residents did end up footing part of the bill for the expansion, and that's correct, kind of created some of this concern.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of different electrical in South Dakota that they have their own regulations. I mean, every state has its own regulation, but then there's these markets too. Um, Whether it's, they call them MISO or PJM, there are these different markets and have different regulations. So some markets are even unregulated versus regulated. South Dakota is regulated. I think, Steve Kolbeck, who um, works for Excel and manages things in South Dakota, mentioned that anything that they would want to do, whether it's even raising rates, has to go in front of the Public Utility Commission. They can't even do that. I would just add one thing is naturally prices of power over time go up just because of the cost of things we've all experienced have gone up. But what is causing that could be a variety of different reasons. I mean, it could be the cost of materials for solar panels, or if you're using wind, it could even be the price of natural gas. So there's a lot of factors that go into also why the price of electricity could go up.
Anything else you want to talk about regarding electricity?
Um,
I don't have
regarding,
anything, but I just am kind of opening that up. And then I should have asked another question about water. So I
right.
apologize. I want to step
No, this is
back
good.
into talking about water. One of the
Okay.
things I noticed in the city council meeting was that there seemed to be kind of dropping a hint or suggesting like, hey, we've got gray water. The plant's, real close, and I wasn't quite sure how to take that. Has that been a discussion at all to use some sort of gray water for cooling instead of tap water?
Yeah, so I'm not sure what plant, just to be clear, what plant were they referring to, or are you referring to that was going to close, or?
I think was it the water treatment plant was close by? I remember
Oh
them
yeah,
saying
close
something
by.
close
Yeah, yeah.
by.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought you meant close, as in like it was
No,
going to close
close
down.
by.
Something was going to.
Yeah.
Right. So just to be clear too, the city, the way we even got through the annexation, that was a concern, just so everyone knows too. The city was like, hey, Gemini, we can't, supply heavy industrial use water for your project. We can provide that domestic water, which, I kind of explained is for just like if you were building an office building. Um, that we can supply, but if you need a really heavy load of water, we can't provide that. So we did look at, alternatives. One of those alternatives, if we do need, a larger source of water, is the water treatment plant that's not very far away. And so a lot of the, I guess you would say, water that's going in there, it's treated, and then it's some of it or all of it is discharged into the Big Sioux River. So we could potentially tap into that wastewater. In some ways, there might be some environmental benefits to that too, because they have to treat the water. Of course, this water has like different things and chemicals in it, but we could potentially take it. And if we need to, there's also on-site filtration we could do to then prepare it to use in whatever type of cooling system we need to do. And that's what came up. So that's an option. But again, just to be clear, that would actually fall on us again. We would have to pay for the cost of that. We would have to figure out how we are going to deliver that to the site. This wouldn't fall on the city or the taxpayers. That would be our responsibility. So that's kind of what the water treatment facility was, why that came up. About the cooling, that evaporative cooling, what they used to do, again, why I'm saying it's very different is you had these big rooms with a bunch of servers, and they were literally, the operators were just cooling the entire room. And eventually, yeah, that would keep the temperature, low enough for the computers to be able to run properly. Now, what they're actually doing is, okay, we don't need to cool the whole entire room. We need to go to the source of the heat, which is these servers, the chips, and they're cooling the server racks, the infrastructure itself is being cooled directly. So that makes it, once again, super efficient. If you're not just cooling an entire room, but you're actually cooling the source, it's a big difference. On top of that, they're even coming up with technologies where the chips, which again are the ones that are radiating the heat, those server racks, are being immersed in certain type of liquid cooling. So that's another system where there more and more advancements, and that's kind of what I was saying too, is from 24 to 2025 to 2026, these like advancements are happening in real time, and people are coming up with new, server rack designs, new types of cooling systems, more efficient chips that, even if you go a few years back, it's could be even a night and day situation between what we're designing for, a few years from now.
HB 1052 would provide a tax cut for certain items for a data center. Has that been anything that people have discussed with you at all?
Yeah, that is something that's come up. Um, some may refer to it as a tax cut. I don't think it's necessarily a tax cut. The way they're phrasing it, even technically, is more of a rebate or a exemption. But so meaning if they don't spend the money, then there wouldn't be any money to exempt or rebate. But yeah, I think that's again, since we're not the operator, this would mostly apply to equipment that would be going inside these data centers. Our plan is not to be purchasing that, so we're not, the direct beneficiary of that. Of course, if we want to attract data centers to, South Dakota, whether it's our project or any other, these types of incentives, are considered. And the challenge is, as I think, we've discussed before, that many states, 40 or more, have already put those in place. So to make the state competitive with even the direct surrounding states, Nebraska, Minnesota, Iowa, North Dakota, any of those that already have it in place, it's almost just trying to make it an even playing field with those states to attract same types of, end users and customers. Um, that's kind of my take on it.
And one of the things that came up is when I was looking at some of the data centers in Wisconsin, I did just a quick read through their tax incentive program, and it looks like theirs actually includes building the structure, where it looks like South Dakota is more the internal components, if I understood that correctly. And South Dakota has a sunset date where it appears Wisconsin didn't put that in. So we're seeing some changes there. Another thing I was wondering about, though, there were at least three data centers that I found that were giving back donations to the community, like for a water cleanup project for a local stream and that kind of thing. Is that something that you may entertain in the future as being part of the community?
Yeah, I think we would definitely, those are things that we would consider. I mean, we want to make a positive impact and we think the project will, but also outside of that, from what you're mentioning, is just being a positive, yeah, member of the community. That's crucial as well. And one thing I do like, I think this is real important on that topic too, is I know there was some skepticism too, like, oh, how much tax will this actually generate? And then also, where is this tax money going to end up going? Because a lot of times people are like, well, where did it benefit? So there would be a decent amount of tax revenue generated from the electricity usage because Sioux Falls does have that in place. But I think another important one is the property taxes, and the fact that that at least is actually heavily structured towards the schools. A big part of that goes directly to the schools. It's not really, I think, I'm not an expert in Sioux Falls and South Dakota real estate tax, but that's what has been explained to me. Um, and so the schools in the community would get a big chunk of those funds from the property taxes. And whether they already have state-of-the-art facilities, they would advance even further. But all sorts of, whether you could use it for any type of programs, robotics, things of the future that people are talking about, even, outdoor facilities, sport facilities. That money I think will be substantial. And if it's going directly to the schools, that's something that I think will benefit the community in the future very much. And so we think from that standpoint, there's a very big impact as well that will help not just today, but the future.
And I'm hearing that a property tax assessment could be 1.5 billion roughly. Does that sound about right to you?
I I don't have a number for that. I would say that's probably even conservative just from what I've people have estimated. Yeah, it would be a substantial amount because these would be it's a very large project, so
Right.
it would be substantial.
And then another question that I have is the environment. How would this impact the environment? We talked about usage of water. usage of electricity. Any concerns or data on, I don't know, radiation, the pollutants in water, but anything like that that we need to be mindful of?
So I think from again, the industry is headed towards a direction of being very conscious of the environment, and that's how a lot of these designs are. Even the end users who are operating these have some pretty substantial goals about how to become um, neutral with their impact to the environment. So all of those things kind of have to be addressed one by one. Yes, if there are, there's habitat there, we need to follow and make sure that we're not disturbing it. If there's, any type of pollution from, let's say, water that just needs to be then treated ourselves, potentially before it's dispersed into whatever other system. So there are a lot of rules and laws in place, but even a lot of the operators go to an even higher level just because they have certain environmental goals too. So I think yeah, that those are some of the big considerations and definitely being factored into all the parts of the design of a project.
Is there anything else that you'd like to cover while we have our time here together today?
I mean, I think all I would say is, something I wanted to share, not necessarily, but even to just share more about myself because I didn't even get a chance to really tell. So, I am a married father of three. I've got 9-year-old twin boys and a 2-year-old daughter. So very much a lot of things people were bringing up in the meeting, I'm concerned about too, and I think we need to also consider those things because I'm addressing it in real time with my kids. I think there were concerns just about technology, AI, all those concerns. My thoughts are, and what's happening across the country is, yeah, we need to put safeguards in place, even with social media and kids and so forth. But data centers are also kind of the backbone. It's like the digital infrastructure, just like we need roads, bridges, highways, that data centers play a role as digital infrastructure. So I think we need those. And in my opinion, I'd want the data center to be US based than to be relying more and more on potentially foreign based ones because they are being built. And keeping American data, in America is definitely a concern of mine. And I think something that everyone should give some consideration to. But we also need to work on policies to make sure that it's used for the right purposes. Of course, because we want this to have a healthy impact on, our children, our future. And that's something that's truly important to us. We have a lot of projects we could work on. We wouldn't be working on something unless we truly, believed it was going to have a positive impact. And I heard what everyone shared. We heard them. We're definitely listening to them, and we're going to factor that into, whatever developments come down the road.